So are certain Warhammer 40K armies unplayable? That is the question that we're going to explore in this vlog, but perhaps not in the way that you're thinking about. And if you're familiar with Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop, this sci-fi based miniatures game is always in flux. There are various factions, there are various armies in the universe that all play uniquely different and have multiple units per faction. So it's not kind of this standard war game where you've got a couple of infantry units and maybe some heavy tanks. There are multiple entries across multiple armies. Approaching this type of diversity, there's a duality to it. First, it's awesome to play a faction and have so many different ways to build and develop your army. Literally, it's a dual-edged sword. So many options to choose from. In the long term, this means you fall in love with an army, you can really grow out multiple play styles. But on the opposite side, and Games Workshop makes no attempt to do this, and we'll put aside whether that's by design or just it's impossible to do or it's part of the narrative, they make no attempt to balance the game. So you read the lore about certain units, and then on the tabletop, they're absolute rubbish. Or in the moment, this unit is really good, but Games Workshop is constantly switching new editions, new books, new supplements, and it changes it out of nowhere. And you're like, what am I going to do right now? So the balance from that perspective does mean from time to time, certain armies are harder to play, or your vision of the army might be unplayable. And there's this idea of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, maybe tier 4. Tier 1 are essentially armies and builds that you set up, and based on the flux of the rules and how they're not balanced, you set it up, you walk away, you come back in like 40 minutes, and the army played the game for you and won the game for you. Tier 2 armies are still very, very powerful, but they require some finesse on the tabletop. Tier 3, hit or miss. I mean, if you've got good tactics and you've got a good build, it's still going to be an uphill struggle against Tier 2 armies. Against Tier 1 armies, it's going to be a real struggle, and I never say never. And then Tier 4 armies, if we're utilizing that system, that playbook, you play it for the love of the army. Let's just put it that way. You play it for the love of the narrative, and it's going to be very, very challenging to win. Now, that's how a lot of places, people, events, enthusiasts approach 40K. I'm going to go even a little bit further on that based on the design and implementation of the models themselves. Okay, agree or disagree from this perspective. So what's awesome about 40K that I love is the scale that it's truly 1-to-1. One Space Marine represents one Space Marine. One Space Bug, one Gaunt represents one Gaunt. One Ripper Swarm represents one Ripper Swarm. And I'm using Tyranids as an example here. Compare that to other war games. We see this in historicals sometimes, DBA, DBN, the DBX systems, where I have a group of Romans on a base. That doesn't represent 4 Romans. It represents a group in the army, or All Quiet on the Martian front. There's a duality of one Martian war machine. The scale represents one Martian war machine. One tank represents one tank, American or British type tank. The infantry, a stand of infantry, 4 on there, represent a group. Maybe it's 4, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15. It represents an element. So 40K is 1-to-1. That giant Titan, that represents one Titan. That's the scale. A Land Raider represents a Land Raider. What this means by being unplayable, certain armies by their design are more horde-based. Using Tyranids, Space Bugs, you can play Nidzilla. It's been out of fashion for a long time, but look, I've got like 23 Carnifexes at this point. So I'm going to play larger Space Bug lists. I love multiple Tyrants in different iterations when the rules allow you to do that. But the game wants to have lots and lots of little bugs. Looking at Necrons, one of the ways, or I should say the primary way that they want to play. Necrons want lots and lots of undead space robots, just, warriors and things like that. So what this means is you have to build those models. Orc players are like, Fritz, we know exactly what you're talking about. That's why GW teases us with some new orc sculpts every now and then, because they know, like, we're building and putting down hundreds of boys on the table, and you've got to paint them. So when you approach certain armies and certain builds, beyond being expensive, there's the time required to build them. There's the time and effort required to field them. That is a major commitment. That by itself does make certain armies a little bit unplayable because the buy-in or the approach or just what's expected to optimize them becomes much harder. Now, that doesn't mean you're locked in. Here's a case in point. Space Marines, you can build Elite. Space Marines, you can build Horde. GW wants you to play Horde everything, so you have like tons and tons of models and spend that. There was a time when I was playing Tyranids, and I was playing primarily spawn-based lists at the time. I would put down 30, 40, 50, 60 space bugs, get them blasted off the table. Next turn, spawn a bunch more, have some pods drop in, and spawn more and spawn more. I was playing in tournaments where, besides the fact I'm bringing 2 giant cases and traveling with that, I would also wake up Monday morning. So I'm playing Friday night in the mini event, team event, Saturday and Sunday in the main events. I'd wake up Monday where I'm like, I can't move. My back is just done. And I'm like, how is this possible? It's because I've been leaning over the gaming table for like 2 days straight. I rebounded in the opposite direction. Now, this army was not efficient in this build, but it was possible. Grey Knights, being Space Marines, you can play them Horde, but there's a tremendous buy-in to play Grey Knights because GW, again, not being balanced for their powers and abilities, they tend to jack them up. At the time, I played 2 large Paladin squads backed by 2 jacked up HQs. So I had like 23, 24, 25 models. The tactics were area denial. The tactics were reserves. The tactics were try to stay out of sight until the last turn and cash and grab at the last moment. The rules have obviously evolved by then, but literally my army fit in a nice little inquisitorial box that I made. That was a lot of fun to play because I could just have some fun playing the army and enjoying the socialization and enjoying the event itself as opposed to keeping track of hundreds of space bugs. So I use that as an example, even though that was a few editions back. This idea that Games Workshop, certain armies play at certain levels optimally. We all can't commit to that. So if you want to play those armies, now you're making concessions, that kind of makes the army a little bit unplayable. So from that perspective, yes, we're battling the fact that the rules are in flux and GW does not balance. We're battling the fact that are you tier 1, 2, or 3, or maybe 4? And then we're battling with the fact model resources, physical 1-to-1 on the table. Your thoughts. Does that make certain armies unplayable?